Dererick stood before the massive gates of the Duplain estate, a place where commoners were rarely welcomed. Inside the annex, the young noble girl Della lounged on her chair, looking down on everyone with pure disdain. Without a word of greeting, she tipped a bucket of stinking sewer water directly onto Dererick's head. Dererick didn't flinch, his eyes remaining fixed on the girl as the foul liquid soaked his clothes. Della laughed and kicked him in the chest, ordering the sour rat to know his place. Later that day, Grand Duke Duplain granted Dererick full authority over his daughter's education. Returning to the room, Dererick landed a resounding slap across Della's face, silencing her instantly. In the dead of night, he dragged the screaming girl out of the mansion and into the dark woods. Della stumbled through the underbrush, her expensive dress tearing as she tried to flee. Dererick followed her like a hunter, his sword drawn and gleaming under the moon. He unleashed a fireball that exploded just inches away from her, lighting up the trees. Cornered against a large tree, Della realized that her title would not save her from this man. Dererick raised his blade, telling her he enjoyed crushing the pride of arrogant nobles. Della closed her eyes, waiting for the end as she felt the wind from his swing. Suddenly, a jagged wall of ice burst from the ground, blocking the sword's path. Dererick stopped his blade, a faint smile appearing on his face as he looked at the ice. He realized that Della was not talentless, she simply used a different kind of magic. He sheathed his sword and told her that her real training began now. Della collapsed into the dirt, sobbing with a mixture of relief and lingering terror. Dererick explained that she belonged to the school of the wild, which favors instinct over theory. He began to wrap her injured legs, showing a strange kindness after the night's brutality. As they walked back, Della looked at her hands, feeling the mana for the first time. For the first time in her life, the proud noble girl whispered a thank you to her commoner teacher. The next morning, she was already at his door, eager to practice what she had manifested. The maids whispered in the hallways, shocked by the sudden change in the young lady's behavior. Days of intense training followed, with Della learning to sense the mana in the air around her. Dererick watched her progress from a distance, acknowledging that she was truly a genius of the wild. However, he reminded her that she still had a long way to go to reach one-star rank. Her brother Regg watched from the shadows, his face contorted with jealousy and suspicion. He couldn't believe a mere commoner was succeeding where all noble masters had failed. Dererick sensed the hostility but ignored it, focusing solely on the girl's magical development. Della started to see the beauty in nature, realizing it was the source of her strength. Dererick told her that magic is like a brush and her mana is the paint. She took his words to heart, visualizing her power as a cohesive, beautiful image. The news of her progress reached the Grand Duke, who began to reconsider her future. But the plan to send her to the monastery still hung over her like a dark cloud. Regg finally confronted them, demanding a spar to prove Della's rank was a fluke. Della looked at Dererick, seeking reassurance before the biggest trial of her life. Dererick simply told her to win using any method she had learned. With a new sense of purpose, Della stepped onto the arena stage to face her brother. The dense canopy of the dark forest swallowed the moonlight as Della scrambled through the thick underbrush. Behind her, Dererick walked with a slow and rhythmic pace that echoed like a death knell. Her breath came in ragged gasps as the sharp branches tore at her expensive silk gown. Dererick flicked his wrist, sending a small spark of mana that exploded near her feet to keep her moving. Della tripped over a protruding root and tumbled into a shallow, muddy ravine. He looked down at her from the ridge, his face an unreadable mask of professional indifference. She screamed at him that her father would have him executed for such insolence. Dererick simply pointed out that in this wilderness her title carried no more weight than a fallen leaf. Suddenly, a low growl vibrated through the air, signaling the arrival of a forest predator. A shadow wolf stepped into the clearing, its fur matted with dried blood and malice. Della scrambled backward, her hands searching the dirt for any kind of weapon. Dererick watched from the shadows of a tree, refusing to intervene as the beast lunged. At the moment of impact, a surge of raw, violent energy erupted from Della's chest. The wolf was thrown back by a jagged pillar of ice that shot up from the frozen earth. Dererick's eyes widened as he recognized the chaotic, unrefined nature of her manifestation. This was not the structured magic of the academies, but the primal school of the wild. Della collapsed into the snow created by her own magic, her body trembling with mana exhaustion. Dererick descended the slope and stood over her, his shadow casting a long dark line over her small frame. he explained that her failure in the academy was because they tried to cage a storm in a teacup. For the first time, Della looked at her hands not with shame but with genuine wonder. Dererick commanded her to stand up, for the night's lesson had only just begun. He forced her to hold a shard of ice in her bare hand until her skin turned numb and red. The mercenary told her to feel the temperature, to understand the essence of the cold rather than calculating it. Della closed her eyes, trying to synchronize her racing heartbeat with the biting frost. She visualized the wolf again, channeling her fear into a directed stream of mana. The energy fizzled out into a weak puff of mist, making her groan in frustration. Dererick struck her shoulder with his staff to remind her that distraction leads to death. She glared at him with a fire that hadn't been there when she was just a spoiled brat. He smirked, knowing that her hatred for him was a far better fuel for magic than noble pride. For hours they repeated the cycle of meditation and violent exertion under the trees. Della's movements became less clumsy, shedding the restrictive etiquette of her upbringing. She asked him why a commoner like him knew more about the soul than the Grand Duke's scholars. Dererick replied that mercenaries learn through survival, while nobles learn through comfort. He showed her a forbidden 3-star spell circle etched into his own skin. Della realized then that her tutor was far more dangerous and ambitious than she had ever imagined. She stood up and demanded he teach her the techniques to defeat her brother Regg. Dererick agreed, but warned her that winning would require her to fight dirty like a mercenary. By the time the sun rose, the spoiled noble girl was gone, replaced by a weary but sharpened weapon. They walked back toward the Duplain estate in silence, the dynamic between them forever altered. Dererick handed her a small, unmarked vial of blue liquid as they reached the gates. He whispered that the true test would be whether she had the stomach to use it when the time came. Della hid the vial in her dress just as her brother Regg appeared at the balcony, looking down with contempt. She didn't look away this time, her gaze meeting his with a coldness that rivaled the ice in the woods. A messenger ran toward them, announcing that the duel for her future had been moved up to tomorrow. Della realized she only had 24 hours to master a power she barely understood. Regg laughed from above, promising to break her spirit once and for all in front of the entire court. Dererick watched the exchange, his hand subtly moving toward the hidden dagger at his belt. The weight of the vial in Della's pocket felt like a burning coal against her skin. As the sun reached its zenith, a strange dark mana began to leak from the cracks in the training arena floor. Something was wrong with the arena, and Dererick realized his student was walking into a trap far deadlier than a simple spar. Dererick watched from the shadows as the arena floor hummed with a dangerous, unauthorized frequency. He noticed the subtle shimmer of a suppression circle hidden beneath the sand of the sparring pit. It seemed the noble house was not above cheating to ensure their failure remained a failure. Della stepped into the light, her tattered dress a stark contrast to the gleaming armor of the guards. Regg Duplain waited for her with a condescending smile and his staff held like a scepter. He told her that a few days in the woods wouldn't change the fact that she was a disgrace. Della didn't respond with words, instead lowering her center of gravity just as Dererick had taught her. The signal to begin rang out, and Regg immediately launched a volley of refined fireballs. Della rolled through the sand, ignoring the heat and the screams of the watching nobles. She felt the suppression circle trying to dampen her mana, but she reached deeper into her fear. Remembering the mercenary way, she kicked a cloud of dust directly into Regg's eyes. The crowd gasped at such a dirty tactic coming from a Duplain lady. Blinged by the grit, Regg swung his staff wildly, his elegant form crumbling into chaos. Della seized the moment, her mana snapping into place like a jagged blade of ice. For the first time in her life, a 1-star manifestation appeared clearly for everyone to see. Regg recovered and unleashed a massive wave of flame that shattered her ice defense. The sheer difference in mana capacity forced Della back until she hit the stone wall. Regg held his staff to her throat, declaring his victory with a trembling voice. Despite the loss, Della looked into his eyes and laughed, knowing she had finally found her path. A booming voice from the high balcony ordered the spar to end immediately. The Grand Duke descended the stairs, his eyes fixed on the girl who had been his greatest disappointment. He knelt down and placed a hand on Della's shoulder, acknowledging her talent for the first time. He announced that Dererick had fulfilled his contract beyond all expectations. Later that evening, the Grand Duke presented Dererick with 3 ancient, 3-star spellbooks. With his reward in hand, the mercenary knew his time in the Duplain household was over. He found Della waiting for him at the courtyard gates, her eyes red from crying. She asked him if he really had to leave now that they were finally making progress. Dererick told her that a wild animal can't grow properly if it stays in a cage with a master. He handed her a small jagged piece of flint and told her to keep her fire burning. Della gripped the stone tightly, promising to become the strongest mage in the Empire. Dererick turned and walked into the misty night without looking back. As he traveled, he opened the first spellbook and felt the surge of forbidden knowledge within. The commoner who was once mocked now held the keys to the higher realms of power. Back at the manor, Della began her training at dawn, alone and focused. She no longer needed a tutor to frighten her into action. She had found the strength within herself. The House of Duplain was no longer a prison, but the foundation of her new legend. The talentless noble and the ruthless commoner had both changed the world in their own way. Their paths might never cross again, but the bond formed in the wild would last forever. Dererick crested a hill and saw a new city on the horizon, ready for his next challenge. The story of the ruthless instructor had come to a close, leaving behind a legacy of ice and fire.